tremendous tariff on lumber and things as such, and yet we don't need their lumber. We have more lumber than they do. We don't need Canada's lumber.
Canada does not dump lumber into the United States, and we will continue to make the case that these current and proposed duties are unjustified.
Provide a little bit more lumber within their supply, but there's no way that they can replace the imports coming from Canada.
Many saw Donald Trump's claim that the U.S. didn't need Canadian automobiles or lumber as just another display of political arrogance. The tariffs, however, followed. Overnight, Washington taxed Canadian lumber severely and framed it as a national security issue. Markets erupted in a matter of days. Prices surged, surpassing $650 per thousand board feet, and it affected homebuilders nationwide. Projects that had previously appeared profitable started to stagnate as construction prices skyrocketed. The core of America's housing structure was affected by just one choice. The majority of the lumber used in U.S. homes comes from Canada, accounting for around one-third of the total. The administration had transformed a policy change into a housing market shockwave by taxing that lifeline. The builders paused. The cost of homes increased to the point where many families could no longer afford them. Every increase in price could prevent millions of people from ever having a home. Experts warned. The whole basis of American housing was being altered by what had begun as an attempt to increase domestic employment. Could a strategy intended to fortify the country ultimately lead to a widening economic gap? The data showed an unsettling reality that political rhetoric had omitted after the tariffs took effect. Approximately 12 billion board feet of softwood lumber, or about 25% of what the U.S. needs, are supplied by Canada each year. Production would still be short by more than 3 billion board feet, even if every sawmill in America operated continuously. For years, analysts had cautioned that taking Canada's place in the supply chain would not be a temporary solution. It might take almost 10 years to make up the deficit, even in the best of circumstances with new mills, a full staff, and significant investment. Furthermore, that estimate is predicated on the U.S. being able to obtain the manpower and resources required to increase production, which is far from clear. Due to outdated machinery and ongoing labor shortages, the majority of American mills are already operating close to capacity, at about 95%. In every area of the property market, those boundaries became apparent. Lumber prices increased more quickly than wages, which put pressure on contractors and made builders spend more for each frame and beam. The effect spread swiftly. The cost of homes increased. The pace of construction slowed. Families who had previously intended to purchase were priced out of the market. What started out as an effort to save domestic jobs has now become a barrier to the economy as a whole. The strategy intended to protect American business had set off an inflationary tsunami that extended from job sites to home budgets, as each increase in lumber prices added weight to an already costly housing system. The two economies had grown so linked that independence from Canadian imports now appeared more like strain than strength. Canada's leadership adopted a different strategy while the U.S. struggled with rising costs. Prime Minister Mark Carney's administration prioritized adaptation over punishment. To help lumber producers diversify their markets and lessen their reliance on American consumers, Ottawa announced a $500 million project. Shortly after, an additional $1.2 billion package was introduced to boost the industry's competitiveness overseas and shield it from anti-dumping taxes. Ravi Parmar, the Minister of Forests for British Columbia, set a lofty goal. At least 10% of lumber exports should be diverted to new international markets. Confrontation was not the goal of this reaction. It has to do with reinvention. The tariffs are presented by Canadian officials as an opportunity to reconsider how their lumber industry might compete internationally. Long dependent on consistent U.S. demand, British Columbia and Alberta developed into hubs for new investment and modernization. The government invested heavily on trade missions, innovation awards, and infrastructural upgrades that would speed up and boost exports. What might have been a setback to self-assurance became a catalyst for transformation. Canada started growing its network as the U.S. tightened trade restrictions, solidifying its position in a global market that was looking for trustworthy suppliers. The two neighbors' differences become increasingly apparent over time. For many years, the American market accounted for almost 90% of Canada's lumber exports. That reliance had felt unbreakable. However, as the tariffs stopped that flow, Canadian producers searched elsewhere for opportunities. Shipments started going to markets in the Middle East and North Africa, as well as South Korea, Vietnam, India, Australia, and the United Kingdom. Japan, which had traditionally been a minor player in Canada's export strategy, had a roughly 26% increase in imports from early 2020 to 24, indicating that foreign purchasers perceived stability where others saw risk. Trade agreements with nations like South Korea and Germany ensued, creating new avenues for expansion and solidifying Canada's standing as a reliable, sustainable supplier of building supplies. To deal with the increase in international trade, big forestry firms and port authorities in Prince Rupert and Vancouver made significant investments in modernization at home. Now, every shipment that departed Canadian soil represented more than just trade. It signaled a change in the nation's economic character. Dependency on its neighbor to the south was no longer a defining characteristic of Canada. It was evolving into a self-assured international provider, prepared to compete in areas well outside of North America. In the meantime, the U.S. was dealing with the unexpected consequences of its policy. Frustration grew throughout the housing sector. Delays in growing budgets were reported by builders in places like Florida, Ohio, and Texas. Numerous building projects either halted or slowed down. According to the National Association of Home Builders, the cost of a new home increased by around $1,000 for every 1% increase in timber prices. The average home cost an extra $10,000 as prices shot up to $765 per thousand board feet without any improvement in the quality or materials. Mills in Western Canada welcomed technology and started producing high-value goods like engineered wood and premium lumber components instead of raw exports. A more comprehensive industrial strategy was reflected in this evolution. Climb the value chain and focus more on innovation than volume in your competition. Every trade agreement made overseas bore symbolic weight, signifying not only a contract but also Canada's new position in the world economy. Once mostly dependent on American demand, the nation was now every incomplete neighborhood and postponed infrastructure project is a testament to the experiment's findings. The scarcity of housing worsened. Redrawings of trade routes were made. In the lumber equation, Canada, which had previously been viewed as the smaller partner, was now clearly in the lead. Its diversification strategy had turned a period of economic strain into a worldwide opportunity. It was no longer characterized by its ties to the U.S. home market for the first time in decades. With the help of innovation, environmental consciousness, and an expanding network of global partners, it was making a name for itself in the global market. Both countries' perceptions of their roles were altered by this change. In Canada, the industry has become a model of long-term planning because two investments in sustainable forestry and green technologies. Meanwhile, discussions on how to change direction without conceding defeat heated up in the United States. It was difficult to overlook the situation's irony. Instead of reducing Canada's leverage, tariffs had increased it. Every new agreement reached in Seoul, Tokyo, or Berlin demonstrated how swiftly world power can change when opportunity and strategy collide. Additionally, every American initiative that delayed served as a reminder to the country's residents of how intertwined modern economies have become. However, Canada had learned a valuable lesson about forethought from this trade battle. Its main strength turned out to be adaptation. Resistance turned into a vulnerability for the U.S. Timber was no longer the only factor dividing the two countries. It represented two completely different reactions to a world that was changing. One relied on cooperation and adaptation, while the other relied on control and seclusion. And those decisions were having real-time repercussions. Today, the subject looms over every policy debate, boardroom, and building site in North America. Was Canada's rise made possible by protectionism, or did it genuinely protect American interests? Because there has always been more to this narrative than just tariffs and lumber. It's about how economic power changes when outdated tactics can't keep up with an increasingly interconnected world. It's about what happens when a country is closed off by the very walls that were constructed to protect it. One choice set off a series of events that altered the trade landscape of North America, turning partners into rivals and changing the balance of power for years to come. What are your thoughts on all of this? Let us know in the comments section below. Make sure to switch on notifications and subscribe to our channel before you depart. We appreciate your interest and hope to see you in the next